Hello and welcome to Loose Cannon, the Civil Liberties podcast. I'm Jonathan Gadir and I'm here with columnist from the SMH and The Age, Parnell McGuinness. Hi, Parnell.
Hi, lovely to be here again.
And today it's comedy, commentary, free speech and defamation with Charles Firth of The Chaser and his lawyer, Michael Bradley of Mark Law. Shall we start with you introducing your fellow Sydney Uni comedian?
Well, yeah, sure. So Charles and I knew one another a bit at university. That was back when he invented The Chaser, and and I got to have a think about what's satire and what isn't. No, but it was lots of fun. As I was thinking about earlier today, if anybody ever found there's some footage somewhere on the ABC cutting room floor, I imagine, of me running around in a bikini to Benny Hill music, thanks to Charles. So thanks, Charles. Thanks for coming.
That is an extremely defamatory way of introducing me. But so much. But I don't necessarily deny that that's true. I do not recall it being true, but. Still,
you went on to much better and much brighter things. And certainly I went away for a few years and I remember coming back and thinking, wow, this Chaser thing's really gotten funny.
And with you, at your suggestion, Charles, is lawyer Michael Bradley. Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Yeah, now I am not, he is not my lawyer. And I think saying that is defamatory towards both of us.
Oh, okay. You just know him. He's not your lawyer.
Yeah.
Okay. So why did you, Charles, why did you recommend Michael for this conversation?
Because he's hilarious.
Oh, well, that's
and also because he's done some very important work in recent months representing Joe Dye. Am I correct in saying that?
Yep.
In the Christian Porter case, there was a sort of side case that Michael represented, and that's how I first came to know Michael was through that link.
Okay. So, Charles, you came to the Council for Civil Liberties meeting a couple of months ago, and you had some concerns and some requests about, well, your concerns are about the number of lawsuits that are filed against entertainers and comedians, and you were sort of wondering whether there was something in the way of a legal defence fund, I think, that we should think about setting up. Because tell me a bit about why you are worried and what made you come and give that spiel to the New South Wales Council for Civil Liberties.
Well, it was in the wake of the Friendly Geordies case where the Deputy Premier here in New South Wales sued this sort of YouTube comedian for defamation based on a video which was essentially quite a sort of well-researched piece alleging certain allegations of corruption against the Deputy Premier. And we just thought this is such a sort of outrageous piece of abuse of the law to get a politician to silence somebody. And then we too have had several legal threats, some more serious than others in the last few months. And we just got the sense that the government and the Liberal Party in particular, the coalition, has sort of fallen in love with suing people as a way to shut them up. Like there's all these people who, and let's face it, all these politicians have something which we don't have, which is parliamentary privilege. They have a complete right to say whatever they like about any of us. They could accuse us all of heinous crimes and fraud and corruption, and we would be powerless to do anything about it. And yet, the moment, some comedian sort of makes a political comment about the Deputy Premier of our state, then suddenly he finds himself with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of legal bills. And what our experience, we went through a little bit of a trouble earlier in the year, made us realise was how isolated we felt in that moment. That, another example I just remembered is Shane Bazzi, who's this unemployed guy. You might know him from Twitter. He's quite prominent on Twitter. He tweeted something about Peter Dutton, some, fairly slanderous but not like, like it was just a bloody tweeter.
Apologist, wasn't it?
Sorry?
He called him a rape apologist, I think it was.
Yeah, that's right.
Dutton's he said, she said in the Brittany Higgins case.
And he's being sued. Like, he's being sued. And the thing that this sort of attack makes you do is, first of all, you've got to have thousands of dollars initially just to get good legal advice. And then it just made us feel really isolated. And we didn't actually end up responding to some of these threats in a particularly sophisticated manner, because it became an exercise in risk mitigation. Like, if you feel isolated and acting alone, you don't act with power. Like, you don't go, oh yes, we'll take on the world, we'll fight justice, and we'll fight for political free speech in this country. We should be allowed to make large comments about our political leaders. We go, actually, we can't afford to spend the next 18 months embroiled in this thing. And that's what they're counting on. They're counting on just this little sort of bit here, bit there, that chips away at the desire to comment on politicians. And I would actually trace the beginning of this obsession that the Murdoch media and the Liberal Party and the National Party have with suing people all the time. I would trace it back to Chris Kinney, because when Andrew Hansen on one of the Chaser shows accused Chris Kinney of being a dog fucker, and it was clearly a joke, and then Chris Kinney sued for defamation, what happened was there was a sort of process inside the ABC, which I wasn't party to at all. I was not in any way involved in this lawsuit. So I don't actually know what went on, because everyone was made to sign these confidentiality clauses at the end. But my read just from the outside was, at some point when, all my Chaser friends seemed fairly confident that they had it in the bag, that calling somebody a dog fucker is not particularly defamatory because it's just so clearly a joke, that instead what happened was the ABC folded. Chris Kinney got a little bit of a payoff. I don't know how much it was, but, presumably a nice car or, start of a deposit on a house or something like that. And everyone around him, all his mates, looked around and went, oh, that's a good grift, isn't it? You just you just sue these people, they'll fold, and you go on your way. And so it has both the chilling effect politically, but also it's this sort of horrible sense of privilege and entitlement that we're not allowed to comment on people who we absolutely should have the right to comment on in any way that we want.
And so you were thinking, well, what can we do? And maybe if we get together, we have some kind of collective fund or something that we can draw on. Is that basically?
Yeah. So I'm not a lawyer. I don't know whether this is a good strategy, but my thought had been, instead of, like, I think Friendly Geordie's raised like $1 million or something for his legal defence fund. So there's certainly people willing to support the side of people wanting to defend their rights to free speech out there. And I think Shane Bezzy raised over $150,000. But instead of that being a sort of enterprise where, once you get sued, you've then got to do this whole elaborate thing to sort of go to the next point, actually having a collective pool of money where you go, no, let's collectivize this legal defence fund. Let's make it so that there's a single port of call. So anyone who tweets on social media or, puts out a post and gets threatened by these bullies who are in power, can come to a one-stop shop, and we've got a legal defence fund there, and there can be a coordinated effort back against these bullies to sort of go, no, we'll all be sharing information, we'll all have the same lawyer, and you'd better watch out, because actually, since 1991, Australia has apparently had some sort of level of implied right of political speech. And the problem, it is outrageous that these politicians are getting away with it. And at some point, even though they're all 70-year-olds who are white and male, But one of these judges one day are going to say, no, enough is enough, and it'll end up going all the way to the High Court, one of these cases, and that costs a lot of money. But actually, it is too outrageous. There is too much abuse of the defamation laws now that we've got to draw a line and just say, no, we are not. We are defending everything. We're not folding. We're not apologising. We get to say what we want to say.
Michael Bradley, you have any take on what Charles has just said in regards to, defending against this sort of thing?
Yeah, well, I agree with everything Charles said. To take the Andrew Laming example, Laming peppered the landscape with defamation threats by his lawyer to basically anyone who'd repeated the allegation that he was an upskirter. And we were approached by a few of the recipients of those threats, and our advice to them was to tell Laming to fuck off, and which we did in writing in longer terms, and that was the end of that. But
lawyers are good at that. We don't usually write letters like that are short, like fuck off. We usually do a few paragraphs, don't we? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's important to justify our training, but yeah. Most people, apologised, and some paid money, and the nub of the issue was Laming's assertion that he wasn't an upskirter because the woman was wearing shorts, and that was the point of distinction that he said, made it defamatory. Now, he is he is suing, but if there was ever a less meritorious defamation plaintiff than Andrew Laming, I don't know who that would be. But yeah, it's kind of emblematic of the problem that the law is supporting that kind of intimidatory approach. And as Charles said, if you're the poor punter on the end of a threat, then it is an expensive and an intimidating business to have to go and get legal advice to work out what to do about it. And the simplest thing to do is to take down the post, apologise, maybe pay a couple of $1,000s. It's still going to be cheaper than paying your own lawyer. Definitely less risk than being sued. And that's, but of course, that has a continuously compounding effect of silencing and chilling the landscape, not just for satirists, but for anyone wanting to make comment on matters of public interest. The fact that so many of our politicians are now suing for defamation so much of the time says a lot about what the environment now is. I mean, no politician should ever consider suing for defamation, in my view, and they shouldn't be able to.
Yeah, Charles, you said something about half the cabinet. What was that figure you said?
Yeah, I was trying to find out where I got that figure from. I think a lawyer told me, but I think it's probably untrue.
It's completely untrue. Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
But if you go through it, there are a lot of them who are, but it's not necessarily the cabinet. It's actually there's also out of ministry, like it's actually the sort of front bench that are because. In the inner cabinet, a lot of them presumably don't have time. Like Josh Frydenberg, he hasn't launched a suit against anyone. Neither is Scott Morrison. What are they doing? They're dragging their feet.
Maybe they're busy. I don't know.
I don't think Scott Morrison is very busy. I suppose he's got some cubby houses to build. So.
Yeah. Parnell, you wanted to ask a few things. I know you mentioned earlier about other cases, Aston and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems to me that there are sort of two questions here. Number one, should politicians be able to sue for defamation, which I think is an interesting question in its own right. And then number two, should people be suing satirists and comedians for defamation? And I think that they're almost two separate questions, really, because as you say, Charles, politicians have a certain platform and frankly also a certain position where arguably they put themselves up and should be able to take the criticism that comes to them. On the other hand, though, if you take this into the private sphere for a second, and I'm talking now like private business sphere, there's the case of Joe Aston, the columnist, the Rear Window columnist of the Australian Financial Review, who was sued by Elaine Stead, a venture capitalist, whom he had accused of not being very bright, essentially, of making very bad investments, and generally called her a feminist cretin and made other things which, in the context of the articles, many people found very, very funny. In fact, many people see Joe Aston as much as a satirist as a business columnist. When it got to court, the judge seemed to find Aston very funny, but eventually decided on the basis, I'm reading between the lines here, but decided on the basis of where he was publishing that he was writing opinion in the newspaper, which had to be based on fact. And so therefore found that the targeted campaign was unjustifiable. So it seems that the outcome in that case was based on what the category of media was, whether it was satire or whether it was news or opinion, which some of these sort of satirists now are crossing over between. I wondered if you, Michael and Charles, had any thoughts on when things start crossing lines like that, how that should be dealt with by individuals who feel that they've been defamed.
Well, first of all, just to answer that first point, which I agree with Michael, which is I think once you have public office, you're right, and you have things like parliamentary privilege, it should just be completely impossible for you to sue anyone. Like, it should just be you're a paid public figure. You're allowed to say whatever you like. Anyone should be allowed to say what they like about you. I think it's absurd, and so because it's you just at a simple power analysis, you hold so much more power than anyone you could sue. On the other thing, I would be strongly opposed to satirists being granted the same privileges as politicians or something. I think that's a recipe. I don't know why, but it just instinctively makes me go, no, that sounds. I mean, I don't think anyone should sue us, but I also don't think that we should sort of go, oh, let's venerate those satirists. They'll know how to handle that power.
Yeah.
So, isn't the point that, we need serious law reform here about what is fair game? Like, this the type of stuff that you can say and it's interesting that you say, oh, there's this sort of, we think of satire in Australia here as sort of, I suppose, news parody in a way. It's a very limited understanding of what satire is. Whereas, I've been working with one of the founders of Gawker recently about setting something up in the US, and her thinking of what satire is more sort of what Gawker was like, which was a sort of, Joe Aston style rough and ready gossip column based on facts, but sort of that sling mud around. But it's not in any way a parody. It's that's what they would call satirical writing. It's sort of, private eye style. Let's deal with the world and write intelligently and entertainingly about it. And so I think coming up with sort of, distinct categories and, you're allowed to, I think the more you write laws about who's allowed to comment and who's not allowed to comment, the further into shit you're going to get, because that's just going to be used against you. Like, eventually there'll be people who control those rules that are going to end up, making it so that, I don't know, like suddenly Sky News will be a satire network and they'll be able to say anything about anyone or something. I don't know. Actually, they already are a satire. What am I
Right, but I mean, on the other hand, sort of, to take the Chris Kinney example, so he's not a politician. Can you say anything about somebody just because they're a public figure? And then where does that line get drawn?
Oh, I see. So is there a special privilege for something that is clearly a joke and that everyone realizes is a joke? Yeah. But I think that's not, I'm not even sure that's a problem, particularly with our defamation laws. I think that was singularly a problem with the fact that the ABC was being pressured by the government. And although no one will ever admit that there was some sort of communication where the Libs were saying, you know what, settle this case, get it off the table. You won't get hassled about it in Senate estimates. And the ABC did what their editorial charter of independence would never actually allow them to admit to, which is that they folded because there was pressure from above. So, I mean, I think yeah, you're right. Like, yeah, our defamation laws should definitely allow you to say that Chris Kinney is a dog fucker because it's so clearly untrue. And it is ridiculous that can even go past the first step of suing somebody. It should just be immediately thrown out. That said, I'm not some sort of I think it's silly to sort of go, well, anyone can say anything about everyone all the time without I don't know. Maybe I do believe that. I don't know. Michael, what do you reckon?
Well, there's no question Chris Kinney had no case. That because he wasn't defamed, because the test for defamation is, would what you published about him be likely to make ordinary reasonable people think less of him? Well, no. I mean, it's Chris Kinney.
Even his son wrote that.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously a self-satirizing person, so it's difficult to get around that. But there's but the fact that it was self-evidently a joke would have been an adequate defence. Our defamation law doesn't have a defence of satire, but what it does say is if there's no defamation, if you are not defamed by what's been published, then you don't have a case, and you can't be defamed if it has no effect on anyone.
In the last few episodes, we talked about how Australia's an outlier on a few things in the civil liberties area. What is this very different from how defamation's done in other comparable countries?
Yeah. I mean, we are the most plaintiff-friendly defamation jurisdiction in the world. That's it's trite to say it, but it is actually true.
Except maybe Singapore. Surely Singapore isn't what is happening very comparable to the way Singapore works, which is that they sue their political rivals and commentators into silence.
Well, it's a very specific context there. I mean, if you are a member of Lee Kuan Yew's family or the Singapore government, then yes, I think Lee Kuan Yew, had a 100% success track record in defamation suits. And yes, it was well known that they used defamation there as a political weapon against their opponents. But that's a corrupted system. It doesn't really tell us much about what should happen in a real democracy. But yeah, there is no sort of direct comparison to the situation here. The new public interest defence, which has just come in most of the states in Australia, we are hoping will make a difference for certain types of journalism. Won't help satire, but investigative journalism will hopefully be assisted by that new defence if it works the way it should. We'll have to wait and see how that goes.
The friendly Geordies thing, do you think someone from, do you think he could come on and talk about it, or would that be a stupid request to make? Like, are they able to talk about the case? Because that's a criminal thing, right? The police are investigating him for being a fixated person or something.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a side. I mean, it's his producer who's been was being arrested by the fixated persons squad. That's a pretty weird and concerning development.
He's a comedy terrorist.
Well, that whole category is one I have a huge problem with. I mean, whoever the cops decide is, fixated. What does that mean? That just means batshit crazy. It's like, how do you disprove that? How do the cops have decided you're fixated?
No, but it isn't fixated. Wasn't it part of the counter-terrorism?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, it was. Yes.
So it's not. Yeah, it's not about stalkers. It's about if police. Wasn't it originally set up to allow police to be racist and racistly impose powers against people of Arabic descent? Isn't that?
Well, that was one view. I mean, it was ostensibly brought in to give the police, to create a particular. I mean, there's no law attached to it. It's just a squad, but the idea was that they would target people who are obsessive about something and dangerous, but sort of outside the reach of the counterterrorism squad. And supposedly they've had great success. They've arrested over 100 people in the last couple of years and seized a lot of weapons and presumably stopped a lot of threats before they became realised.
Well, in fairness, Friendly Geordie's producer was a threat to John Barilaro's career. So,
Yeah. I mean, it is clearly and it's clearly a gross misuse of police power. And if it was done at Barilaro's behest, then that's a disgrace on his account and the police. But who knows? But in terms of the defamation case, well, Friendly Geordie's is more than a satirist. He is, he's making political commentary. He's doing investigative journalism. He's a serious media player. And he called Barilaro corrupt, and he presented his evidence in support of that allegation. That's pretty serious stuff, and I think it goes way outside satire. Certainly a lot of his content is satirical, and he says a lot of rude things about Barilaro and others, some of which are not funny and some of which some people find funny, but some of that qualifies as satire. But there's a very serious allegation at the bottom of that. But clearly he's got under Barilaro's skin, and he's using defamation law in part to try and shut Friendly Geordie's up. But he's probably chosen the wrong target, because Friendly Geordie's fundraising capacity is almost limitless.
I just wanted to ask about the Friendly Geordie's case, because I agree with what you said, that essentially what he's doing is presenting an investigation as satire, and there's a lot of sort of a type of humour which, I don't know, well, I think it's sort of school kid humour, I'd kind of call it. But I also, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable, the space that he sits in, that it seems to me that he does skate between insult and genuine investigation and claims. And while I wouldn't go so far as to defend Barilaro or lay my hand in the fire for him, there is a lot about Friendly Geordie's that seems to me to veer into the bullying territory. And this is what I was getting to before about defamation law in Australia is widely acknowledged to be problematic and unsatisfactory. The fixated persons law is obviously complete overreach in a situation like this. But it does feel like what Barilaro was trying to express is, I feel bullied. Now, it might not be advisable for a grown man and a politician to go out there and say, I feel like I'm being bullied by this commentator. But perhaps should we have some kind of a law like that? Is the defamation system in need of a bit of a fine tune, so that people can express, this is how I feel I'm being treated here? In some cases, genuinely would have bullying undertones. Maybe not this one, but maybe something else.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree. I share your concern about friendly Geordies in that, if you're going to do serious journalism, then you have to be kind of serious about it. And he is trying to keep his foot into sort of pools at the same time as a knockabout satirist and a serious player, and that's okay. He can do that, but he should treat himself as subject to the same sort of ethical obligations that any serious media organisation does. There are responsibilities that go with having an audience like that of that size.
One thing that is interesting about the Friendly Geordies case is that possibly the institutions that we grew up in, where we went through the ABC very early on in our career and had to work with proper editorial policies and processes, even though we were doing comedy, and even just having the mentorship of people around us, sort of, perhaps moderating some of our more radical instincts in that space, is probably not a bad thing. And the fact that, those sorts of institutions that help people with their craft have all crumbled and been disrupted, and people literally are self-publishing stuff and getting really large platforms without any sort of institutional backing, that might go some of the way to explain why there's these sorts of, Friendly Geordies style shoot from the hip sort of moments in the media thing.
Yeah, because they're young guys, right? They're really young.
Yeah. But one of the things that we've done recently, just in the last year, is we've set up a sister site to the Chaser called The Shot, which is exactly which is exactly the sort of more well-researched, commentary, opinion stuff. And it was based on the recognition that actually, they are two separate forms, and that, it's still entertaining writing, it's still funny and stuff like that. But if we want to be able to actually say potent, powerful things, we actually have to back it up with the research, and we have to take it seriously. And, I've been on lots of phones all day to lawyers sort of legaling the latest piece that's about to go out. Like, it's just, it's just about stepping up and taking the responsibility that you have to take when you're actually leveling that sort of, well-researched opinion into the public sphere. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's not a bad thing for democracy that people who are commenting with a powerful platform should have some level of craft and integrity and factual basis for their commentary.
All right, guys, thanks very much. Appreciate it. Really good discussion. And, I guess we'll put the details for the Chaser and the Shot in our show notes, but only if you cross-promote our, initiative.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
All 4 episodes of it. And and I'll say that's all for today's Loose Cannon. Thanks for listening. Subscribe and tell your friends, and see you all next time.